Welcome to Hollywood Pulse. In this video, we are going to explore guilty, pleasure sword and sorcery movies packed with fearless warriors, dangerous quests, fantastical worlds, and wildly over-the-top characters. These films may not have always been praised by critics, but their outrageous action, unforgettable costumes, epic battles, and unmistakable 1980s and 1990s charm have earned them loyal fans. 1. The Lost Empire, 1984. Released in 1984 and directed by Jim Wynorski, The Lost Empire is a colorful cult adventure that combines martial arts, fantasy, science fiction, and exploitation cinema into one unmistakably 1980s experience. The story follows a group of heroes who become involved in a dangerous search for a mysterious lost civilization and a powerful artifact. The movie was part of a period when independent filmmakers were producing inexpensive fantasy adventures inspired by the success of larger Hollywood productions. Rather than attempting to compete with blockbuster budgets, The Lost Empire embraced practical sets, colorful costumes, martial arts choreography, strange creatures, and exaggerated villains. The film became particularly notable for its mixture of genres, shifting between jungle adventure, fantasy spectacle, and action comedy. Wynorski, who became well known for low-budget genre filmmaking, gave the movie an energetic pace and a deliberately over-the-top style. Although The Lost Empire was never a major mainstream success, its unusual combination of fantasy adventure and B-movie entertainment eventually attracted a devoted cult audience. Today, it is remembered as a time capsule of independent 1980 genre cinema and an example of how filmmakers could create ambitious fantasy adventures without Hollywood-sized resources. For fans of retro sword and sorcery movies, practical effects, colorful villains, and unapologetically campy filmmaking, The Lost Empire remains an entertaining piece of cult cinema history. 2. The Arena, 1974. Released in 1974, The Arena is a historical action film set in the world of ancient Rome, focusing on women forced into gladiatorial combat. The movie was produced during the era when exploitation filmmakers frequently used historical settings to create action-packed adventures that combined spectacle with mature themes. The story centers on a group of women who are captured and brought into the brutal world of the Roman arena, where they must fight for survival while confronting the powerful figures controlling their lives. The film was notable for its combination of sword fighting, ancient world adventure, and exploitation-style filmmaking. It became an early example of genre that would later inspire numerous sword and sandal productions. Although it was made on a relatively modest budget, the filmmakers attempted to create an authentic atmosphere through period costumes, outdoor locations, practical props, and stage combat. The movie developed a reputation among cult film audiences because of its unusual premise and willingness to push the conventions of historical adventure cinema. 3. Barbarian Queen, 1985. Released in 1985 and directed by Hector Oliveira, Barbarian Queen is a quintessential 1980s sword and sorcery cult movie. The film stars Lana Clarkson as Amathea, a fierce warrior whose peaceful village is attacked, forcing her and her companions to embark on a dangerous mission of revenge and rescue. Made during the enormous popularity of fantasy adventures inspired by Conan the Barbarian, the movie embraced the low-budget side of the genre, using practical locations, handmade costumes, sword fights, stunt work, and straightforward fantasy storytelling to create its world. Rather than trying to compete with Hollywood blockbusters, Barbarian Queen leaned into the outrageous energy that made independent fantasy films so entertaining. The movie was released internationally in different versions and attracted attention because of its mature content and exploitation film style. Critics were generally unimpressed, but home video audiences discovered something more enjoyable: a fast-moving fantasy adventure filled with warriors, battles, revenge, and plenty of 1980s B-movie atmosphere. Over time, Lana Clarkson's performance and the film's colorful production helped to develop a loyal cult following. Today, Barbarian Queen is remembered as one of the more recognizable examples of the post-Conan sword and sorcery boom. It may not have had the budget or polish of major fantasy epics, but its unapologetic style, practical filmmaking, and adventurous spirit have helped it survive as a nostalgic favorite among fans of vintage cult cinema. 4. Barbed Wire, 1996. Released in 1996 and directed by David Hogan, Barbed Wire is a futuristic action movie that blends dystopian science fiction, comic book adventure, romance, and 1990s camp. Based on the Dark Horse Comics character, the film stars Pamela Anderson as Barbara Kopetsky, better known as Barbed Wire, a tough nightclub owner and bounty hunter living in a war-torn future America. When an old lover returns to her life, carrying a secret that could threaten the ruling government, Barb becomes involved in a dangerous mission that forces her to choose between staying neutral and taking a stand. The film was clearly influenced by earlier dystopian classics and comic book action movies, but it developed its own exaggerated visual identity through futuristic costumes, motorcycles, weapons, and dark nightclub settings. Unfortunately, Barbed Wire was poorly received by critics and struggled at the box office, making it a commercial disappointment upon release. However, its reputation changed over time as home video audiences began appreciating its deliberately over-the-top style and its place within 1990s pop culture. Pamela Anderson's performance became closely associated with the movie, while its costumes and exaggerated production design helped establish a distinctive visual identity. Today, Barbed Wire is often remembered as a campy cult curiosity rather than a conventional science fiction classic. For fans of 1990s genre cinema, it remains an entertaining time capsule of an era when comic books, dystopian action, and outrageous B-movie aesthetics could collide in spectacular fashion. 5. Amazons, 1986. Released in 1986, Amazons is a fantasy adventure that belongs firmly to the colorful tradition of 1980s sword-and-sorcery cinema. The movie follows a group of warriors caught up in a dangerous struggle involving rival kingdoms, powerful enemies, and a mysterious fantasy world. Like many independent fantasy productions of the decade, Amazons was influenced by the enormous popularity of films such as Conan the Barbarian, which had demonstrated that audiences were willing to embrace heroic fantasy adventures filled with warriors, monsters, and exotic locations. Rather than relying on expensive visual effects, the filmmakers used practical costumes, locations, props, stunt work, and choreographed sword fights to create the movie's fantasy atmosphere. The result is a distinctly low-budget but highly recognizable 1980s production, complete with dramatic battles, colorful characters, and an exaggerated sense of adventure. Although Amazons did not achieve the mainstream recognition of larger fantasy blockbusters, it gradually became interesting to collectors and fans of obscure genre cinema. Its appeal today comes largely from its nostalgic atmosphere and its place within the explosion of independent sword and sorcery movies that followed the success of Conan. For fans of retro fantasy, the film represents a period when filmmakers could take a relatively simple adventure story and transform it into an entertaining world of warriors, kingdoms, danger, and imagination.